Is your US passport about to become the one thing that stops you at the airport in 2026, even though you did everything right? The question sounds dramatic, I know, but stay with me for a second, because what's quietly happening behind the scenes with passport processing in the United States is not what most travelers expect. And it's definitely not what the official headlines are clearly explaining. And if you travel even once every couple of years, this could affect you in ways that feel unfair, confusing, and honestly a little stressful, especially for people who think passports are a boring set it and forget it document. Because starting in 2026, the entire idea of how fast, how flexible, and how forgiving the US passport system is going to change. And I'm not talking about some simple fee increase or a tiny rule tweak. I'm talking about a mindset shift inside the system itself. A shift that treats passports less like a customer service product and more like a tightly controlled security credential. And that difference matters a lot when real humans with real travel plans are involved. Because here's the thing nobody says out loud on YouTube yet: passport delays are no longer just accidents or backlog problems. They're becoming part of the process, almost baked in, and that means travelers who don't plan far ahead, or who assume exceptions will be made, are going to be the ones hit the hardest. Especially families, older travelers, first-time international flyers, and yes, even frequent travelers who think they know all the tricks, because the changes coming in 2026 aren't flashy, they're quiet, procedural, and technical, which is exactly why so many people will miss them until it's too late. And the first big change is the timeline expectation. For years, Americans were trained to believe that if something went wrong, you could rush a passport, expedite it, call a congressman, book an urgent travel appointment, and somehow make it work. But the internal direction moving toward 2026 is very different. Processing windows are being stretched on purpose, not because the government can't go faster, but because the system is being redesigned to prioritize verification over speed. And that sounds reasonable until you realize that verification doesn't just mean checking your documents. It means cross-checking your identity across multiple databases, some domestic, some international, some automated, some still partially manual. And each of those checks adds friction, time, and uncertainty. And here's the part that feels new and uncomfortable: small inconsistencies that used to slide are now being flagged, like name formatting differences, missing middle names, hyphenated last names, old address histories, or even how your place of birth was written decades ago on an original record. Things you didn't create and sometimes can't easily fix suddenly become reasons for review instead of being waved through. And when your application goes into review, it doesn't mean rejection, but it does mean delay. And delays in the passport world don't come with countdown timers or honest updates. They come with silence, weeks of it, sometimes months, and people find this out only after booking flights, hotels, cruises, weddings, family reunions, once-in-a-lifetime trips, and that's where frustration turns into panic. Because in 2026, the system is expected to be far less flexible about urgent travel caused by poor planning, even if that planning mistake feels small or understandable, like assuming renewal takes 6 weeks instead of 12, or assuming your child's passport is valid because it expires next year, without realizing child passports expire sooner, or that some countries require 6 months validity beyond your return date. And while that rule isn't new, enforcement around it is getting stricter as passport officers are being trained to think less like helpers and more like gatekeepers. And I don't say that to scare you, but to be honest about the tone shift that insiders are already feeling, because the US passport is being positioned more clearly as part of a national security ecosystem, not just a travel convenience. And with that comes less tolerance for errors, excuses, and last-minute saves. And another subtle change coming in 2026 is how digital systems interact with your physical passport. More people assume digital equals faster, but in reality, more digital systems often mean more checkpoints, because now your data has to agree everywhere, not just on paper. And the move toward expanded online renewals and digital intake sounds great, and in some ways it is, but it also creates a permanent data trail. So if something in your past application doesn't match what you submit now, even if it was accepted years ago, the system may catch it this time. And when that happens, your application doesn't fail, it stalls, and stalled applications are the hardest to predict, because there's no guaranteed timeline for resolution. And travelers hate uncertainty more than bad news, because bad news at least lets you make a plan. Uncertainty just sits there, ruining sleep. And in 2026, that uncertainty is expected to increase, not decrease, especially during peak travel seasons. And speaking of seasons, another thing changing quietly is how seasonal demand is handled. In the past, summer backlogs were treated as emergencies to be cleared, but moving forward, backlogs are being normalized, meaning the system expects them and plans around them, which sounds efficient on paper. In real life, it means fewer heroic efforts to clear piles quickly, and more acceptance that waiting is just part of the experience. And this is where the average traveler gets caught off guard, because most people only think about passports when they need one. They don't follow policy discussions, they don't read government notices, they don't hang out on travel forums. They just assume the process will be roughly the same as last time. And in 2026, that assumption could be expensive. Emotionally and financially, because missed trips don't always get refunded, especially flights booked with basic fares, cruises with strict deadlines, or international tours that require passports to be submitted weeks in advance. And when you explain to a tour operator that your passport is in process, they don't care why, they just care that it's not in your hand. And the system doesn't bend for stories, no matter how sad or reasonable. And one of the most overlooked changes coming is how supporting documents are handled. Birth certificates, naturalization certificates, and name change records are under more scrutiny, and not just whether they exist, but their condition, clarity, and consistency. Older documents with faded ink, handwritten notes, or slight spelling differences are more likely to trigger requests for additional evidence. And when additional evidence is requested, your application effectively resets its place in line, something most people don't realize. So you might think you're near the end, only to be pushed back weeks because of a document you've used successfully your entire life. And this hits older travelers especially hard, because their records are often older, less standardized, and harder to replace. And while nobody says it publicly, there's an internal push to clean up identity records as part of a long-term data accuracy goal. And passport processing is one of the tools being used to do that, which means travelers are unintentionally becoming part of a larger system cleanup without being told that's what's happening. And then there's the issue of communication, or lack of it. Status updates are expected to remain vague in 2026 because the system isn't designed to give personalized explanations. It's designed to move files through stages, and when a file stalls, the system doesn't always know why in plain English. It just knows it needs human review, and human review is the slowest, most unpredictable part of the process. And the more applications that get flagged for review, the longer everyone waits, and this creates a ripple effect. Because as delays increase, more people try to expedite, call, complain, show up in person, which clogs the system further. And to manage that, access to urgent appointments is expected to become more restricted, with tighter criteria and less discretion, meaning fewer exceptions. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just renew early, that's smart. But even that has limits, because renewal windows aren't infinite. You can't always renew too early without special reasons. And many people don't realize their passport condition, damage, or missing pages could force them into a replacement instead of a simple renewal, which follows different rules and timelines. And in 2026, damaged passport assessments are expected to be stricter. Minor water damage, bent covers, loose bindings, or faded photo pages that once passed may now be considered unacceptable, pushing travelers into longer processes without warning. And families face a whole different layer of complexity. Children's passports still can't be renewed online, both parents' consent rules remain strict, and documentation requirements are unforgiving. And as systems tighten, any missing or mismatched information can slow things down dramatically, and parents often discover this only after planning a family trip, assuming kids' paperwork is simple, when it's actually one of the most rigid parts of the system. And here's something that feels almost unfair, but it's real. Processing speed may increasingly depend on application quality rather than order received, meaning well-prepared, clean applications move faster, while messy ones sit, even if they were submitted earlier. And that creates a quiet advantage for travelers who know the system well, or who double-check every detail, while casual travelers fall behind. And this is where 2026 feels like a dividing line. Travel is becoming less forgiving of casual mistakes, and passports are at the center of that shift. And the emotional part of this story matters too, because travel is tied to joy, connection, freedom, seeing family, celebrating milestones. And when a passport delay blocks that, it feels personal, even if the system insists it's not. And that emotional weight is something no policy memo captures, but travelers feel it deeply. And the worst part is when people blame themselves for not knowing something that was never clearly communicated. And that's why understanding these changes now matters, not to scare you, but to recalibrate expectations. Because the biggest mistake travelers will make in 2026 is assuming the passport system will save them at the last minute like it used to. Because that safety net is shrinking, quietly, steadily, and once it's gone, and the travelers who thrive will be the ones who treat passports as long-term planning tools, not last-minute errands, who check expiration dates early, who match names exactly, who keep documents in good condition, who plan international trips with buffer time instead of optimism, and who understand that in process doesn't mean almost done. It just means waiting. And the uncomfortable truth is that none of this is likely to be reversed, because it aligns with broader global trends around identity verification, order control, and data accuracy. So the smart move isn't to fight it, but to adapt to it. And if there's one mindset shift I want you to take away, it's this. In 2026, your passport isn't just a booklet, it's a system profile. And systems don't care about intentions, only inputs. And the cleaner your inputs, the smoother your travel life will be. And the messier they are, the more friction you'll face, whether you think it's fair or not. And that's why this topic matters so much for everyday travelers, especially those who don't live on travel blogs or forums. Because knowledge here isn't about hacking the system. It's about respecting how it actually works now, not how we wish it still worked. And if this feels like a lot, that's because it is. But awareness is the difference between a smooth trip and a cancelled one. And in a world where travel is already expensive, stressful, and emotionally loaded, the last thing anyone needs is a passport surprise. And that's exactly why these 2026 changes deserve attention now, before they quietly become the new normal and catch millions of travelers off guard. And if you're watching this on Golden Age Travel Tips, remember, smart travel today isn't about flying more, it's about preparing better. Because the golden age of travel favors those who plan ahead, even when the rules don't make noise about changing.